So this is obviously an immensely popular question. It's an immensely difficult question in many ways. And I think because it's so personal, it can be one that's difficult to just answer in a public audience. It's a difficult question to answer in general terms. And that's kind of what we're asked to do as people who believe that unborn life should be protected. We're told to say, actually, you need to just make a blanket claim and you need to ignore, essentially, the personal stories of women. And actually, what I think has been done here is quite clever, because it kind of gets pro-lifers to look like they're ignoring these immensely difficult questions. I saw on Pigeonhole, one of the questions was about whether pro-lifers or Christians should have compassion towards women in this situation. And the answer is absolutely yes. And if our response is anything other than compassion, it can be more than just compassion, but it has to have compassion. And if we don't have that, then we're not doing it right. And so Paul, in his letter to the Corinthians, talks about love, and he says, if I have not love, no matter how well I speak, no matter how well I do anything else, no matter how true the things I'm saying are, if I don't have love, then I'm no better than a clanging gong or a crashing cymbal. And so even if we're right, Paul says without love, without compassion, it means absolutely nothing. And that has to be central to our answer as Christians. Now, I want to put up this slide that talks a little bit about this difficult question of women who have been put in this awful, awful situation. And I said the first thing we need to talk about is how personal it is. But what that means is, actually, most of this debate is not personal at all. When you look at this debate in the media, on the news, in forums, in school, or whatever, it talks in very general terms. What about the woman who is a victim of this? And actually, what we don't hear very much from is women who have gone through that horrid experience and who have chosen either abortion or who have chosen to continue the pregnancy. And one of the things that most people don't know, in fact, is that most women who have been sexually assaulted, who have become pregnant as a result of rape, decide to keep the baby. And we're often fed this narrative that if someone has gone through this horrendous experience, the obvious answer is to have an abortion to help deal with that. But actually, the statistics don't bear that out at all. If you look at the statistics, we see women who go through this usually choose to keep the baby. Now, what people often think, again, is there's kind of an assumption that abortion will heal some of that harm, and an assumption that an abortion will make the mental health better, that it will help restore the woman. And when you look at the studies, there's a wonderful book by David Reardon, who surveys about 200 women who have become pregnant as a result of rape. He finds that actually, out of the women who chose to keep the child, not a single one regretted it. Not a single one regretted it. Not a single one, when they had the baby, only saw the baby as a pain in their lives or as a reminder of that traumatic event. Every single woman who carried the baby to term thought that they made the right decision. But by contrast, almost all the women who had an abortion after that case in his study actually did regret it. They say, I wish I didn't do this, and I would encourage women to not do this again. 90% of the women said they would encourage women who had been through that to have the baby. And I talked earlier about the mental health side of things, that there's this assumption that women's mental health will be improved by having an abortion. And looking at the literature on this particular question, and more generally, just shows very clearly abortion, whether it's the result of a terrible sexual assault or not, abortion doesn't improve mental health, and it doesn't restore people. And in fact, if you ask people who have had a baby in these circumstances, they say the only thing that brought me meaning was the fact that I had this baby. The baby was the only thing that made what I have been through tolerable. It's the only thing that made me able to cope with it. And so speaking to those women and hearing from those women, which we don't do when we talk about this, is something that actually when we do it, we see it's not a simple answer. We're often fed the narrative that abortion is the best way to solve the trauma from rape. But when we speak to these women and we hear from these women, and when we look at the evidence, it's a cold word, but it just means lots and lots of individual stories. When we look at those enormous amounts of individual stories, what we see is that abortion never undoes the trauma of the rape. That is something that we have to respond to with love and compassion and psychological work to help women cope with that. But abortion never helps people cope with that. But actually, having the child often, very often, helps people cope with that. There's much more that could be said, but I'll leave it there for now.